The Texas sun blazed overhead, bouncing off the asphalt of Interstate 10 like molten silver. Delaney Voss gripped the steering wheel of her black Chevrolet Tahoe, every sense on high alert. Ahead, the road stretched like a ribbon, and behind her the faint glint of a Cedar Ridge patrol cruiser began to emerge from the shadows cast by a weathered billboard. Delaney wasn't here by accident. Officially on administrative leave from the FBI after a high-profile Chicago case, she was now far from Quantico, drawn by a personal mission. Her younger brother Ronan had been wronged by the very law meant to protect citizens. Money saved for tuition, seized illegally, gone without a trace. The officer responsible, Harlon Quill, was about to discover that his next encounter would not go unnoticed. She kept her Tahoe steady, inching just under the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2, every muscle taut. The cruiser trailed her with predatory patience. When blue and red lights finally erupted behind her, Delaney's calm exterior belied the tension coiling through her body. She signaled, eased onto the gravel shoulder, and placed her hands openly on the steering wheel. A gesture meant to pacify, but also to assert she had nothing to hide. Quill, a mountain of a man, exited his vehicle and approached with a swagger that masked a dangerous ego. The first words were casual, but his intentions were anything but. A classic roadside intimidation tactic. Delaney answered each prompt with calm precision. Her voice steady, she challenged Quill's assertions while carefully positioning the hidden dashcam to capture everything. The exchange escalated quickly. False accusations of drugs, manufactured probable cause, and blatant attempts to assert dominance. Delaney was prepared. She moved deliberately, displaying a knowledge of the law and a tactical awareness honed from years in the field. As Quill reached for his weapon, she stayed unflinching, a steel presence in the hot, humid Texas air. Then came the trap's snap. The faint whir of helicopters and the roar of multiple SUVs on the wrong side of the highway shattered Quill's perception of control. Federal agents, fully armed, descended with surgical precision, rifles trained, red laser dots pinpointing Quill's position. He froze, realization dawning, this was not a civilian confrontation. Delaney calmly identified herself as FBI. The dashcam angle captured every infraction, and Quill's carefully constructed authority crumbled. Within moments, he was restrained, humiliated, and powerless. Inside the Cedar Ridge police station, Delaney oversaw the seizure of files and equipment, dismantling the infrastructure of corruption brick by brick. Quill's world, once defined by fear and coercion, disintegrated around him. Interrogation revealed a web of unlawful actions, bribery, and exploitation of citizens. Sheriff Declan Hale, the architect of this localized tyranny, attempted to destroy evidence but was intercepted. Delaney's tactical approach ensured that every move was precise, leaving no room for escape or misinterpretation. As the federal case unfolded, Quill's cooperation became instrumental in convicting Hale. The courtroom was a stage of justice. Quill's arrogance replaced with fear, his credibility only momentarily salvaged by the truth he revealed. Judge Kira Quill, known for her stringent approach to corruption, rejected leniency, reinforcing that the law demands accountability beyond personal deals. Delaney watched silently, the embodiment of measured resolve and moral clarity. The aftermath saw Cedar Ridge transformed, new leadership, policy reforms, and an enduring lesson in the dangers of unchecked power. Delaney, now Assistant Special Agent in charge, used the case to train recruits on color of law violations, ensuring the lessons of Quill and Hale would educate a new generation of federal agents. The sun set over Quantico, as she called her brother, a simple conversation closing a personal loop of justice. The world felt a fraction brighter, not because it was perfect, but because the machinery of corruption had finally been dismantled. The morning after the raid, Cedar Ridge looked different. The dusty streets seemed quieter, the oppressive weight of fear that had hung over the town now replaced with a tentative calm. Delaney Voss drove slowly through the county, noting the subtle changes. Deputies who once swaggered now kept their heads down, and the locals moved with a measure of cautious relief. She checked her phone, noting a string of alerts confirming that Hale and Quill had been transported to federal facilities. Each notification was a small victory, but the real work was just beginning. Inside the makeshift command center set up in the repurposed police station, Delaney and her team pored over files, digital logs, and audio evidence. Every stop Quill had made, every transaction he had manipulated, every call he had placed to cover his tracks was documented. Each piece of evidence added depth to the narrative they were building against the corrupt system that had flourished under Hale's reign. Delaney felt the weight of responsibility keenly. She knew that dismantling this network meant more than arrests. It meant restoring faith. Ronan sat nearby, quietly observing the operation. The youthful energy in his eyes contrasted sharply with the somber atmosphere of federal officers reviewing the destruction of a criminal empire. Delaney glanced at him, her mind drifting back to the moment she had received his frantic call. It was that call that had reignited her sense of purpose, pulling her back into the field when she had expected to remain on leave. The personal stakes reminded her that the law was not an abstract concept. It was a shield for the vulnerable. The team coordinated with state officials to ensure a seamless transition of power. Interim appointments were made, and new protocols were enforced immediately. Body cameras would be active at all times, and any officer seen neglecting their duty would face instant suspension. Delaney knew that cultural change was harder than legal enforcement, but she also knew it was necessary. Cedar Ridge had been built on fear and secrecy, and the restoration of transparency was paramount. Later that evening, Delaney returned to the scene of the initial traffic stop, the stretch of Interstate 10 where she had first confronted Quill. The asphalt shimmered in the late sunlight, and the air held a subtle chill as dusk approached. She stood for a moment, feeling the weight of the confrontation, replaying each decision, each move. The calm confidence she had displayed was not arrogance. It was the result of meticulous preparation and years of training. She allowed herself a brief nod of satisfaction. The trap had worked, the rogue officer subdued, and the corruption exposed. Back in her Quantico office, Delaney prepared a report for internal review. She chronicled every action, every misstep, and every triumph. Her words were precise, measured, and free from embellishment. She understood that this document would serve as a blueprint for future agents, a case study in ethical enforcement, and a warning to those who might misuse authority. The justice achieved in Cedar Ridge was not just about punishment, it was about setting a precedent. As night fell, Delaney finally allowed herself a moment of personal reflection. The world outside her office window seemed quieter, safer, as if the chaos that had defined Cedar Ridge had been temporarily suspended. She called Ronan, checking in on his day. Their conversation was light, filled with laughter, a contrast to the grim business they had been part of together. Delaney felt a measure of peace, knowing that, at least for now, they had restored some balance to the world. Yet she remained vigilant, aware that corruption could flourish anywhere if left unchecked. The battle was never truly over, but tonight a hard-earned victory rested in their hands. The sun had barely risen over the rolling Texas hills when Delaney Voss returned to Cedar Ridge. The county had been quiet, almost eerily so, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous day. She moved through the town in a rental car, her eyes scanning the familiar landmarks, noting the subtle signs of change. Businesses reopened cautiously, wary employees peeking from behind doors as the news of the FBI raid spread. There was a tension in the air, a collective breath held, waiting to see if the shadow of corruption had truly lifted. Inside the now empty Cedar Ridge police station, Delaney coordinated with her tactical team. Boxes of confiscated evidence were catalogued meticulously, computers bagged, files scanned, ensuring a permanent record. Every detail mattered. These records would serve as the backbone for prosecutions and as a historical account of the systemic abuse that had gone unchecked for years. Delaney walked between the agents, offering guidance and double-checking procedures, her demeanor both commanding and reassuring. Ronan shadowed her throughout the morning, taking careful notes for his own understanding of law enforcement processes. His curiosity and attentiveness reminded Delaney why she had come back into the field. Protecting her family had led to a larger mission, ensuring justice was not just a word but a lived reality for the residents of Cedar Ridge. Each action, from photographing seized assets to recording statements from former deputies, was deliberate, aimed at constructing an irrefutable case against those who had exploited their authority. The team focused on the financial trails first. Every bank transaction, seized asset, and personal expenditure of Hale and Quill was scrutinized. Patterns emerged. A systematic approach to laundering, profiting off the innocent, and manipulating local government structures. Delaney knew that uncovering these patterns was crucial not only for the prosecution, but also to prevent future misuse of power. Transparency was their goal, and she was determined to leave nothing hidden. By mid-afternoon, Delaney and Ronan stood outside the local courthouse, observing the town's tentative return to order. People moved with cautious optimism, but the fear that had long defined Cedar Ridge still lingered. Delaney reflected on the psychological scars left behind, not just on the community, but on those like her brother, whose lives had been disrupted by arbitrary authority. She understood that true justice extended beyond convictions. It included the restoration of trust and the rebuilding of social bonds. Evening came, and Delaney returned to her temporary quarters, reviewing footage from the dash cams and surveillance deployed during the arrests. Each clip was a lesson in both human behavior and procedural precision. She noted the reactions of Quill and Hale, the subtle cues of guilt, and the overconfidence that had been their undoing. This analysis was critical for preparing training modules for recruits, ensuring that future agents could recognize the signs of abuse and act decisively. As night fell, Delaney called Ronan again, checking in on his studies and offering encouragement. The personal satisfaction of seeing justice served mingled with professional fulfillment. The county had been shaken, the corrupt dismantled, and a precedent established. Delaney knew this was just one victory in a long career, but it was meaningful. Cedar Ridge would never forget, and neither would she. The fight for accountability was ongoing, but tonight, for the first time in a long while, it felt as though a weight had been lifted. The path forward would be difficult, but it was clear. Justice, once blind, had finally seen and acted. The next morning, Delaney Voss was back on the road, this time heading toward the remnants of Hale's sprawling ranch. The sun burned a bright path across the Texas sky, casting long shadows of mesquite trees over the dusty roads. She drove deliberately, hands steady on the wheel, reflecting on the aftermath of the arrests. Cedar Ridge was quiet, but the echoes of fear and corruption were still present in the air. Her mission had expanded, uncovering the hidden layers of abuse, tracking down missing evidence, and ensuring no stone was left unturned. At the ranch, the FBI team combed through every building, from the main house to the stables and barns. Delaney walked through rooms layered with dust and neglect, noting financial ledgers, hidden safes, and documents carefully stashed in closets and drawers. Each discovery revealed a deeper web of manipulation, unreported seizures, false citations, and money funneled to offshore accounts. She took photographs, recorded statements, and catalogued evidence meticulously, knowing these pieces would be essential for ongoing prosecutions. Ronan accompanied her cautiously, observing the procedural rigor and asking thoughtful questions. Delaney explained the importance of chain of custody and maintaining accuracy in every report. Her brother had grown up seeing law enforcement from a distance, and now he was witnessing both the power and the responsibility inherent in these roles. Delaney felt a mixture of pride and protective instinct. His curiosity and intelligence would need careful guidance if he were to understand the complexities of justice. In the stables, agents discovered valuable assets purchased with ill-gotten gains. Cattle, quarter horses, and high-end equipment, all meticulously catalogued, would be seized and redistributed or auctioned under federal supervision. Delaney paused to note how ordinary citizens had been victims while Hale enriched himself, highlighting the human cost of corruption. Each item catalogued was a story of abuse reversed, a tangible restitution to those wronged. Later, Delaney held a briefing with her team in a temporary command center set up in the ranch office. Charts, logs, and digital maps covered the tables. They tracked the patterns of unlawful seizures and the flow of money, connecting dots that spanned the county and beyond. Her attention to detail and ability to synthesize information impressed even seasoned agents. Cedar Ridge had been a complex ecosystem of abuse, but methodical evidence gathering was beginning to map out the entire operation. By sunset, Delaney walked alone across the property, surveying the horizon where the sky met endless fields. The weight of the mission pressed upon her, but there was a measure of satisfaction in seeing accountability restored. The air smelled of dust and hay, carrying with it the faint scent of oil and equipment, a reminder of the labor and greed that had fueled corruption here for decades. She thought of the victims, of her brother, and of the agents who had worked tirelessly to bring justice. As darkness settled, Delaney returned to the temporary quarters, reviewing digital footage from surveillance drones and body cams. Every action was analyzed: the placement of hidden safes, the reactions of individuals when confronted, and the chain of orders that had perpetuated abuse. Each frame was a lesson, a training opportunity, and a permanent record. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the fatigue in her muscles, but also the steady pulse of purpose. Cedar Ridge had begun to heal, and she was determined to see it through until every trace of corruption was unearthed and justice fully served. Delaney Voss woke to the sound of distant engines and the warm glow of a Texas sunrise filtering through the blinds. The day ahead would focus on federal filings and coordinating with prosecutors, but her mind lingered on the tangible victories in Cedar Ridge. Quill and Hale were behind bars, yet the work to secure the integrity of the county's institutions was far from finished. The team reconvened at the temporary command center. Agents discussed asset liquidation, bank account seizures, and the proper documentation of every item removed from Hale's estate. Delaney listened carefully, making tactical notes. Every dollar accounted for was a step toward restoring trust in the legal system. The smallest oversight could compromise prosecutions or allow loopholes for lingering corruption. Ronan, observing quietly, asked questions about the investigative process. Delaney explained the significance of chain of custody and corroborating evidence. She highlighted the importance of understanding human behavior, noting how Quill's arrogance and overconfidence led to his downfall. Her explanations were patient, but her eyes betrayed a simmering awareness. Corruption leaves a legacy, and vigilance is required at every level to prevent its return. They visited the local courthouse to oversee the secure transfer of files to federal custody. The building, once a hub of intimidation and fear, was now a symbol of accountability. Each cabinet cleared, each file logged, was a testament to the meticulous work of agents who refused to let local power structures manipulate justice. Delaney felt the weight of her role, not only as an investigator, but as a guardian of public trust. As the afternoon heat intensified, Delaney walked the perimeter of Hale's ranch with Special Agent Preston Vale. They discussed upcoming witness interviews and methods to ensure the testimony of former deputies remained truthful and uncontaminated. Delaney's focus was precise. The narrative needed to be airtight, leaving no room for defense attorneys to exploit gaps or ambiguities. Later, reviewing digital evidence back in the temporary office, Delaney paused on a sequence from the dash cam capturing Quill's initial roadside intimidation. The frame froze on his face, twisted with fury and disbelief. She noted the subtle signals of guilt, the patterns of coercion, and the human consequences of unchecked power. Each clip would later become a training module, illustrating the intersection of law enforcement authority and ethical responsibility. Night fell, and Delaney called Ronan to ensure he was safe and focused on his studies. The conversation was light, a brief respite from the gravity of their work. Yet the weight of Cedar Ridge's transformation lingered. Justice had been served, but the rebuilding of public trust would take time. As she hung up, Delaney reflected on the lessons of the day. Corruption is pervasive, vigilance is essential, and accountability is the only path to lasting reform. The battle was ongoing, but every methodical step forward fortified the foundation of integrity she had dedicated herself to protecting. The following morning, Delaney returned to Cedar Ridge, feeling the heavy weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders. The county was quiet, almost eerily so, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous raids. Businesses cautiously reopened, their owners wary, peeking through dust-streaked windows. The locals were beginning to believe that the law could actually protect them and not just serve as a weapon in the hands of the corrupt. Inside the commandeered police station, Delaney oversaw the cataloging of evidence with meticulous precision. Files, computers, and seized assets were inventoried and photographed. Every document, from Hale's financial records to Quill's personal files, was logged with exacting detail. The agents worked methodically, understanding that these records would not only convict, but also prevent future abuse. Delaney walked among them, offering guidance, correcting minor oversights, and ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Ronan, observing silently, took notes, absorbing the complexity of federal investigations. He had witnessed firsthand how personal stakes could intersect with systemic corruption. Delaney explained the importance of maintaining clear chains of custody, the ethics of evidence handling, and how human behavior patterns could expose malfeasance. She spoke with the authority of someone who had stared down criminals at every level, from street-level gang members to organized crime syndicates. Cedar Ridge might have been small, but the corruption was deeply rooted, requiring both skill and patience to dismantle. By midday, Delaney met with a team of auditors to review bank accounts and seized funds. The patterns revealed a careful orchestration of financial abuse, accounts siphoned under the guise of law enforcement authority, assets diverted to private accounts, and falsified records. Delaney documented each discovery, noting every anomaly for future prosecutorial review. Every corrected record, every verified transaction was a step toward restoring accountability and public trust. Later, she visited the properties tied to Hale, overseeing the removal and cataloging of high-value assets. Cattle, horses, equipment, and vehicles, all purchased with funds obtained through corruption. She documented everything, photographing the seized items and coordinating with federal custodians. Each piece of evidence was a story, each record a testament to the abuses perpetrated under the guise of law. As the sun began to set, Delaney took a moment alone, standing on the ranch's porch. The horizon stretched endlessly, the sky ablaze with orange and gold. She reflected on the county's slow emergence from darkness and on the personal stakes that had drawn her here. Justice had been delivered, but the human cost lingered. Families and victims would need reassurance, and the system needed to demonstrate it was now a shield, not a sword. That evening, back at her temporary quarters, Delaney reviewed digital footage from dashcams and body cameras. Every clip told a story: intimidation, arrogance, abuse, and the precise steps taken to restore accountability. She made notes for training purposes, understanding that Cedar Ridge's story would serve as a teaching tool for new recruits. Delaney allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The operation had been precise, decisive, and morally clear. Yet she knew vigilance was ongoing. Corruption could rise anywhere, but tonight Cedar Ridge had been reclaimed. And that reclamation, Delaney knew, was just the beginning. The following day, Delaney returned to Cedar Ridge, this time focusing on the long-term restoration of law enforcement integrity. The streets were quiet, but the residual tension of fear and intimidation lingered. She moved through the town methodically, observing residents cautiously re-engaging with daily life. The presence of federal oversight had changed the social landscape. Officers once emboldened by corruption now tread carefully, aware of accountability. Inside the refurbished police station, Delaney coordinated a series of interviews with former deputies and town officials. Each conversation was documented and cross-checked against the evidence already collected. She emphasized the importance of honesty and full disclosure, reinforcing that transparency was critical to preventing a resurgence of the abuses perpetrated under Hale and Quill. Notes, recordings, and photographs filled the temporary command center, creating a detailed archive that would serve both judicial and training purposes. Ronan accompanied her once again, absorbing the gravity of the investigation. Delaney encouraged him to observe the human elements of law enforcement, the psychology behind decisions, the subtle cues of deceit, and the behavioral patterns that revealed hidden agendas. He was learning that justice was as much about understanding people as it was about collecting evidence. Delaney reflected on her brother's growth, proud that he was witnessing the meticulous application of law and ethics. In the afternoon, the team focused on asset management. Every item previously purchased with illicit funds, from luxury vehicles to ranch equipment, was inventoried and logged. Agents coordinated with federal custodians to ensure secure storage and eventual redistribution or liquidation, demonstrating accountability at every stage. Delaney meticulously reviewed every transaction, noting discrepancies and confirming that each item could be linked back to unlawful activity. By evening, Delaney conducted a debriefing with her tactical team. They analyzed patterns in Quill's and Hale's operations, the methods used to manipulate citizens, and the internal dynamics that allowed corruption to persist. She emphasized lessons learned, the importance of oversight, the necessity of documenting interactions, and the ethical obligations of law enforcement. Each agent left the room with a clearer understanding of both procedure and moral responsibility. Later, Delaney walked alone along the perimeter of Hale's ranch, surveying the horizon as the sun dipped behind the distant hills. The air carried a faint scent of dust and hay, a reminder of the rural setting that had become a backdrop for systemic corruption. She reflected on the balance between authority and accountability, understanding that true justice required constant vigilance and proactive measures to safeguard the public trust. Night fell, and Delaney returned to her temporary quarters to review digital footage and case files. Each recording, each photograph, each document reinforced the depth of the corruption they had dismantled. She made annotations, prepared training materials for federal recruits, and ensured that Cedar Ridge would serve as a cautionary tale for years to come. As she looked out the window at the stars above the Texas plains, she felt a quiet sense of purpose. Justice had been delivered, but her work was far from over. The lessons of Cedar Ridge would echo in her future operations, guiding her and the next generation of agents toward integrity and vigilance. Delaney Voss spent the morning reviewing court documents and preparing witness statements for ongoing investigations. Cedar Ridge had begun to breathe, but the psychological scars left on its residents were palpable. Families who had been intimidated or coerced were slowly reclaiming their sense of safety, while Delaney meticulously ensured that every piece of evidence was properly documented to prevent future miscarriages of justice. The team worked efficiently, cataloging digital evidence and cross-referencing it with financial records. Delaney noted patterns in the illicit activities, how Quill and Hale exploited the local infrastructure, manipulated minor deputies, and leveraged fear to maintain control. Each discovery reinforced the importance of the oversight protocols she was now implementing in the county. Cedar Ridge would be different this time. Transparency and accountability would form the foundation of its law enforcement. Ronan continued to observe closely, learning the intricacies of federal procedure and the importance of ethical enforcement. Delaney explained the subtle psychological markers of authority abuse, overconfidence, manipulation of fear, and the rationalizations corrupt officers used to justify illegal acts. Her explanations were detailed, sometimes pausing to show him dash cam footage, illustrating precisely how human behavior could be both observed and countered with strategic action. Midday brought a meeting with the newly appointed interim sheriff, Cedar Quill, a former Texas Ranger renowned for her strict adherence to the law. Delaney outlined the policies for body camera usage, duty to intervene protocols, and asset management, emphasizing that these reforms were non-negotiable. The sheriff absorbed the instructions with focused intensity, recognizing that the culture of Cedar Ridge required a firm, principled hand to reshape. In the late afternoon, the agents returned to Hale's ranch to recover remaining documents and secure evidence. Each discovery provided a clearer picture of systemic abuse, linking back to prior illegal seizures, financial misappropriations, and civil rights violations. Delaney supervised personally, ensuring that nothing was overlooked and that all evidence would withstand judicial scrutiny. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Delaney walked the property alone, reflecting on the ripple effects of power misused. Cedar Ridge had been a microcosm of unchecked authority, but careful investigation, methodical evidence gathering, and strategic enforcement had begun to restore equilibrium. She understood the fragility of justice. One misstep could undo months of meticulous work. Nightfall found her back in her temporary quarters, reviewing body cam footage of Quill's stops and Hale's interactions with local officials. She annotated each clip, highlighting lessons on ethics, authority, and accountability. Ronan's questions earlier in the day echoed in her mind, reinforcing the importance of mentorship in the field. Cedar Ridge had been reclaimed, but Delaney knew her vigilance was critical. Justice was fragile, but tonight at least it was in the right hands. By midweek, Cedar Ridge was transforming in ways that were visible to every resident. The police station's new leadership had implemented body camera protocols, and deputies were retrained under the watchful eye of federal agents. Delaney Voss oversaw these initiatives with an unflinching focus, ensuring that every officer understood the seriousness of ethical enforcement and accountability. The community had begun tentatively to trust law enforcement again, a trust that had been systematically eroded over decades. Inside the station, Delaney reviewed the latest batch of digital evidence. Each recording was meticulously catalogued, revealing further instances of misconduct under Quill and Hale. The financial records painted a clear picture of systematic embezzlement and bribery. Delaney noted the significance of patterns, the timing of illegal seizures, and the coordination between officials to obscure accountability. Every detail added weight to the cases being prepared for federal prosecution. Ronan continued to accompany Delaney, increasingly familiar with investigative procedures. He asked probing questions about the decisions and judgments made in the field, which Delaney used as teaching moments. She explained the interplay between human behavior and systemic corruption, demonstrating how careful observation and meticulous evidence gathering were essential for justice. The lessons extended beyond technical skill. They were about ethical clarity and the responsibility of wielding authority. In the afternoon, Delaney and her team conducted interviews with residents who had been affected by Quill and Hale's misconduct. Stories of intimidation, coerced fines, and manipulated legal processes were corroborated with physical evidence and recorded footage. Each interview strengthened the narrative of corruption and highlighted the tangible consequences of unchecked power. Delaney maintained composure, guiding victims through the process while ensuring the integrity of the evidence collected. As the day progressed, agents began sorting through the assets seized from Hale's properties. Cattle, horses, and high-end equipment were documented, photographed, and logged for redistribution or auction. Delaney emphasized transparency, ensuring that the process was visible and accountable. Every step taken was intended to signal that the era of impunity in Cedar Ridge had ended. By evening, Delaney stood alone overlooking the highway where her initial confrontation with Quill had occurred. The quiet stretch of road was now a symbol of accountability, a place where the misuse of authority had been confronted and curtailed. She reflected on the larger lesson. Justice is as much about preparation, precision, and vigilance as it is about enforcement. Cedar Ridge was slowly reclaiming its integrity, but the path ahead required persistent oversight. Nightfall found Delaney reviewing dashcam footage once more, annotating instances of misconduct and lessons for training. Each clip, each recorded interaction, would serve as a guide for future federal agents. As she looked out the window at the starlit Texas sky, Delaney felt the satisfaction of progress tempered by the knowledge that corruption could resurface anywhere. Yet tonight, at least, Cedar Ridge had been held accountable, and the first true steps towards systemic reform had been firmly established. The next day, Delaney Voss focused on consolidating the progress made in Cedar Ridge. The town's law enforcement had begun adopting new oversight protocols. Body camera usage was mandatory, and every officer was trained under strict ethical guidelines. Delaney oversaw each step personally, ensuring compliance and accountability. The changes were small but critical, signaling a departure from decades of fear-driven enforcement. Inside the police station, agents continued cataloging evidence from Hale's operations. Financial records, digital files, and confiscated property were systematically organized. Delaney reviewed each entry, noting patterns of bribery, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. Her meticulous attention to detail ensured that nothing could be disputed in court, reinforcing the legal case and strengthening public trust. Ronan accompanied her, gaining insight into federal investigations. Delaney explained the interplay between human psychology and systemic corruption, illustrating how Quill's arrogance and Hale's strategic manipulation allowed misconduct to flourish. Each observation reinforced the importance of ethics, vigilance, and precision in law enforcement. Ronan absorbed the lessons silently, recognizing the complexity of restoring justice to a community long exploited by those sworn to protect it. By afternoon, Delaney conducted interviews with affected residents. Victims recounted coerced fines, unlawful seizures, and harassment. These accounts, combined with video and financial evidence, painted a comprehensive picture of Cedar Ridge's corruption. Delaney guided the interviews with care, ensuring both accuracy and sensitivity, preserving the dignity of those involved while reinforcing the factual integrity of the investigation. The agents also oversaw the redistribution of seized assets. Horses, cattle, and vehicles were inventoried and documented for federal oversight. Delaney emphasized transparency at every stage, showing the community that stolen property was being handled responsibly. These measures provided tangible proof that justice extended beyond arrests and convictions. As the sun set, Delaney returned to the highway where she had confronted Quill. The empty road stretched before her, symbolizing the quiet aftermath of decisive action. She reflected on the lessons learned, that accountability required foresight, preparation, and the courage to confront abuse directly. Cedar Ridge had begun to recover, yet the vigilance required to maintain integrity was ongoing. Nightfall found Delaney reviewing surveillance footage once more. Each recording highlighted behaviors, patterns, and consequences. These clips would later serve as training material, ensuring future agents could recognize and counter corruption effectively. Looking out at the star-filled Texas sky, Delaney felt a sense of fulfillment. Justice had been served, but she knew the work to maintain it was continuous. Cedar Ridge was on a path to recovery, guided by accountability, transparency, and the unwavering presence of federal oversight. Delaney Voss began the day with a comprehensive review of Cedar Ridge's transformation. The town, still recovering from the systemic corruption, was showing signs of cautious optimism. She walked the streets in plain clothes, observing residents going about their business without the oppressive anxiety that had characterized life under Hale and Quill. The subtle shifts in body language and demeanor signaled that trust, though fragile, was beginning to return. Back at the police station, Delaney held a briefing with her team. They reviewed the documentation of financial discrepancies, seized assets, and recorded testimonies. Each piece of evidence had been meticulously catalogued, ensuring it could withstand the scrutiny of federal courts. Delaney emphasized the importance of precision and thoroughness, reminding her agents that small errors could undermine the painstaking work of rebuilding accountability. Ronan, once a bystander, now understood the depth of investigation required to dismantle systemic corruption. Delaney guided him through the process, showing him how behavioral patterns, procedural lapses, and personal motivations intertwined to create a culture of abuse. She explained how Quill's arrogance and Hale's control mechanisms had allowed corruption to flourish unchecked, highlighting the lessons applicable to broader law enforcement practices. In the afternoon, the team conducted follow-up interviews with community members affected by Quill and Hale's misconduct. These interviews revealed the human cost of systemic abuse. Families intimidated, property unjustly seized, and the lingering trauma of harassment. Delaney handled each conversation with care, balancing the need for factual accuracy with sensitivity to the emotional impact on witnesses. Asset management continued concurrently. Vehicles, equipment, and other items seized from Hale's properties were carefully catalogued and secured under federal oversight. Delaney supervised the process, ensuring transparency and integrity. The redistribution or liquidation of these assets served not only as restitution, but also as a public demonstration that law enforcement could be accountable. As dusk approached, Delaney returned to the highway where she had first confronted Quill. The empty stretch of road was a stark reminder of how far the county had come. She reflected on the importance of vigilance, foresight, and moral clarity in law enforcement. Cedar Ridge's recovery was ongoing, and the lessons learned here would resonate throughout future investigations and training. That night, Delaney reviewed dashcam footage and compiled annotations for training modules. Each recording captured the dynamics of power, corruption, and accountability, serving as both evidence and educational material. As she gazed out at the star-lit Texas sky, a sense of purpose steadied her. Justice had been delivered, trust was slowly restored, and the foundation for sustained reform had been firmly established. Delaney Voss began the morning by auditing the progress in Cedar Ridge, ensuring that every reform and procedural change was being implemented correctly. Officers under the new interim leadership were adjusting to the strict oversight protocols, and Delaney monitored their compliance with keen attention. She knew that sustained change required both enforcement and education, and she was meticulous in documenting each step to create a precedent for future operations. Inside the police station, her team continued reviewing evidence and cross-referencing financial records. Delaney checked each transaction carefully, noting anomalies and confirming the legitimacy of seized assets. The pattern of Quill and Hale's misconduct was now fully documented, and the evidence was organized for federal court presentations. The level of detail was exhaustive, ensuring that prosecutions could proceed without the risk of gaps or challenges to credibility. Ronan observed Delaney closely, taking mental notes on investigative techniques and ethical enforcement. She explained the psychology of authority abuse, highlighting how Quill's overconfidence and Hale's systemic control had enabled decades of corruption. Each observation was a lesson in the consequences of power misused and the importance of vigilance, patience, and precision in restoring justice. In the afternoon, Delaney conducted follow-up interviews with residents affected by the previous regime. These discussions confirmed patterns of intimidation, coercion, and financial exploitation. She guided the interviews with care, ensuring witnesses felt safe and their statements were accurately recorded. Each narrative strengthened the case against the remaining structures of corruption and highlighted the human cost of systemic abuse. The team also continued processing seized assets, meticulously cataloging items ranging from ranch equipment to vehicles and livestock. Delaney emphasized transparency in handling the property, coordinating with federal custodians for secure storage and eventual redistribution. This process was symbolic as well as practical, demonstrating accountability to the community and reinforcing trust in the system. As the sun set, Delaney returned to the stretch of Interstate 10 where she had confronted Quill. The quiet road reflected the county's transformation, serving as a reminder of the impact of direct action combined with strategic oversight. Delaney reflected on the day's accomplishments, aware that systemic reform was gradual but irreversible with sustained diligence. Nightfall found her reviewing dashcam footage and annotating instances of misconduct for training purposes. Each clip captured the dynamics of authority, corruption, and accountability, forming a comprehensive educational resource. Gazing at the star-filled Texas sky, Delaney felt the satisfaction of progress. Cedar Ridge was reclaiming its integrity, the public trust was slowly being restored, and the foundation for lasting reform had been firmly established. Delaney Voss started the day early, reviewing the progress of federal oversight in Cedar Ridge. The town, once dominated by fear and intimidation, was showing signs of recovery. Local officers adapted to new accountability protocols, and Delaney monitored their compliance closely. She emphasized the importance of transparency, making clear that oversight was not temporary but integral to rebuilding trust. Inside the police station, her team continued to catalog seized evidence and financial records. Every transaction, property seizure, and documented misconduct was meticulously logged. Patterns of abuse were identified, highlighting the systemic nature of Hale and Quill's corruption. Delaney reviewed each file personally, ensuring accuracy and completeness to prevent any challenges during federal prosecutions. Ronan observed and asked questions, eager to understand the mechanisms of federal investigation. Delaney explained the psychology behind authority abuse, showing how Quill's ego and Hale's manipulation of subordinate officers had allowed misconduct to persist. Each example provided lessons in vigilance, preparation, and the importance of ethical leadership. In the afternoon, Delaney conducted interviews with community members impacted by prior misconduct. Witnesses described coercion, unlawful fines, and harassment, providing both emotional context and factual evidence. Delaney handled the sessions with empathy and precision, ensuring accurate documentation while protecting the dignity of the victims. These narratives strengthened the federal case and highlighted the human cost of corruption. Meanwhile, the team organized the distribution and auction of assets recovered from Hale's estate. Vehicles, livestock, and high-value equipment were logged and stored securely. Delaney emphasized transparency in every stage, demonstrating accountability and restoring community trust. Each recovered item represented both restitution and a tangible symbol of systemic reform. As sunset approached, Delaney visited the site of her initial confrontation with Quill. The quiet highway symbolized the changes brought about through strategic action and federal oversight. She reflected on the importance of preparation, ethical clarity, and vigilance in maintaining the integrity of law enforcement institutions. Nightfall found her reviewing dashcam footage and annotating it for training purposes. Each clip highlighted patterns of misconduct, human behavior, and the dynamics of accountability. As she looked out at the Texas night sky, Delaney felt a quiet satisfaction. Cedar Ridge was on a path to recovery, public trust was being restored, and the groundwork for sustained reform had been firmly established. Delaney Voss spent the day finalizing the structural reforms in Cedar Ridge. Officers adapted to strict oversight, body camera protocols, and new ethical standards. Delaney monitored compliance closely, emphasizing that accountability was permanent, not temporary. The community began to trust law enforcement again, cautiously yet perceptibly, signaling that the climate of fear was beginning to dissipate. Within the police station, agents organized and cross-referenced financial records, seized property, and documented misconduct. Delaney personally verified each entry, ensuring all evidence was accurate and ready for federal proceedings. The patterns of corruption previously overseen by Hale and Quill were now fully exposed, demonstrating the systematic abuse of authority and solidifying the foundation for lasting accountability. Ronan continued to shadow Delaney, observing investigative methods and the ethical application of authority. She explained the subtle dynamics of corruption, the importance of chain of custody, and how behavioral analysis helped anticipate unlawful actions. Each lesson emphasized the necessity of vigilance and precise documentation, reinforcing the principles of lawful enforcement. In the afternoon, Delaney oversaw follow-up interviews with residents affected by prior misconduct. Witnesses recounted experiences of intimidation, illegal fines, and harassment. Delaney maintained professionalism and empathy, ensuring accurate documentation while safeguarding the dignity of the victims. Their narratives strengthened ongoing federal cases and highlighted the human consequences of systemic abuse. Simultaneously, the team continued processing and securing recovered assets, including vehicles, livestock, and equipment. Delaney ensured that all items were accounted for under federal supervision, establishing both restitution and transparency. The careful handling of property symbolized the restoration of trust and integrity within the community. As sunset approached, Delaney visited the stretch of Interstate 10, where she had first confronted Quill. The empty road reflected the tangible progress of accountability, a reminder of how direct action and strategic oversight had reshaped Cedar Ridge. She reflected on the necessity of continuous vigilance, understanding that systemic reform required sustained attention and proactive measures. Nightfall found Delaney in her temporary quarters, reviewing footage from dash cams and surveillance cameras. Each recording provided lessons in human behavior, authority dynamics, and procedural integrity. The evidence would serve both judicial and educational purposes. Looking at the Texas night sky, Delaney felt a sense of purpose. Justice had been served, trust was being restored, and the foundation for sustained ethical reform had been firmly established. The final morning in Cedar Ridge dawned with a crisp clarity. Delaney Voss stood at the edge of town, observing the highways and streets that had once been traps of fear and manipulation. The sunlight glinted off the asphalt, reflecting the new transparency and accountability that had replaced the corruption of the past. Residents walked freely, children played in yards once shadowed by intimidation, and the county's law enforcement moved with measured diligence, aware of their responsibilities. Inside the refurbished police station, Delaney oversaw the final organization of evidence and documentation. Every file, every asset, and every recorded incident was catalogued and stored, ensuring that the federal case against remaining corrupt elements was airtight. She emphasized to her team that the culmination of the investigation was not just punishment. It was about preserving the rule of law and reinforcing ethical practices for future generations. Ronan joined her at the station, now more knowledgeable and observant than ever. Delaney used the day to mentor him in understanding the balance between enforcement, ethics, and human behavior. She explained how the downfall of Quill and Hale illustrated the consequences of abusing authority and the power of meticulous, principled investigation. Each lesson she imparted carried both professional and personal weight. By afternoon, Delaney walked the stretch of Interstate 10 where she had first confronted Quill. The empty road, bathed in sunlight, was a testament to the changes that had occurred. The arbitrary stops and abuse of power had ceased, and the community could now trust in justice and protection. She reflected on the complex interplay of strategy, patience, and ethical judgment that had led to this moment. Cedar Ridge's redemption was built on evidence, vigilance, and unwavering adherence to the law. As evening fell, she returned to her temporary office to review the final dash cam and surveillance footage. Each clip would serve as both a record of justice served and a training tool for new federal agents. The lessons of Cedar Ridge, human behavior, the dynamics of corruption, and the importance of ethical enforcement would guide the next generation in preventing abuse and protecting the public. Before leaving, Delaney made one final call to Ronan, sharing a quiet moment of reflection and pride in their collective accomplishment. The county had been transformed, the corrupt removed, and systemic reform initiated. The sunlight of the Texas horizon stretched wide, symbolizing the enduring impact of accountability, vigilance, and justice. Delaney turned back toward the office, a sense of purpose and resolution grounding her. Cedar Ridge was no longer a symbol of fear. It was a testament to the power of law applied with integrity. She paused for a moment, then addressed the audience directly. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video. Justice had been achieved, lessons were learned, and the story was complete.